Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Leadership with Heart podcast. Today, I am with Walt Rakowich, and I am so excited to have him on here because, first of all, number one, his reputation precedes him, and so some very close friends of mine were telling me so much about him. And then he was kind enough to have me on his show, and has just been promoting it and promoting it. I'm like, wow, these people are impressive. And so, as a leader himself, as a human, I just wanted to share a bit of him with you today. So, welcome, Walter.
Great to be on, Heather. Thanks so much.
So tell everybody right now, where are you in your leadership journey?
Oh boy. Well, um, yeah, I'm in an interesting spot. I'll tell you. I'm in a spot. I'm less busy than I used to be. Let's put it that way. Well, I would think that by now many of your listeners know that I used to run a very large company, headquartered here in Denver, called Prologis, but I retired 10 years ago. And I got to tell you, when I retired, just like everybody, you kind of struggle and you say, okay, what am I going to do now? Right. But I did have a little bit of a plan, but not 100%. And I sat down and I spent some time with a few people. I triangulated some messages from good friends. And what I ended up doing is I spend about a third of my time in business. I spend a third of my time giving back, and not always charity, but you might say charitable things. And then I spend a third of my time with my wife and my kids, and just playing some golf and sort of enjoying life a little bit more than I did. On the business side, I'm on three public company boards, and one is a hotel company, one is one of the largest owners of assisted living facilities in the nation, and one is as a storage company, informational storage company. But I think what I've been doing on the giving back side is that actually a lot of fun, and I never had the opportunity to do the things that I've done the last couple of years. So that's been fun, and I'll just spend a couple minutes talking about that.
Yeah, do that.
Yeah, so I do, as you mentioned, I do a number of things around leadership, um, most of which center around trying to be impactful to people in a positive way. I chair the board of an organization in town called Colorado Uplift. And what Colorado Uplift does is we go into the inner city public schools, predominantly public schools, and we try to lift up the lives of urban youth. And and many of these kids don't have great role models at home. And so we teach them 5 days a week. We teach them in the public schools about what it means to live a life of character. And we start in the fourth grade, and we take them all the way through 12th grade to the extent we can follow them. I mean, some kids will go school to school to school, and it's not always possible to do that. But to the extent that we spend time with kids for 3 or more years, our graduation rate from high school is over 90%. And really, at the end of the day, what it shows is that if you can pour into the life of a kid, and mentor them and teach them and show them that you love them, they can do great things. And so that's one of the things that we do. And Uplift's been doing that for 40 years. We mentor over 4,000 kids in the Denver inner city. And we've taken that organization now to 15 cities throughout the United States. So it's a great scalable model, and one that I'm really, really excited about. The other thing that you mentioned is, I've written a book called Transfluence. And so it's my way of, I guess you could say, giving back to the business community. Although it's not necessarily geared to the business community, but it speaks about leadership, and really what I'm trying to do is speak into the minds of future leaders of this country, whether they be business leaders or whether they be non-business leaders. But I really am trying to speak a message into other people as to what leadership is all about. And I have a show which airs on LinkedIn, which you were part of a few months ago. And thank you for being on. And it's called Off the Rack. and in that show, I tried to interview different leaders in all capacities. And and then I blog around that and I speak around that from time to time. And really, I'm trying to just get a message out there about leadership, what good leadership looks like, and hopefully, my hope is that it influences people in a very positive way to become better leaders in their spheres of influence. So, whether it be the inner city, or whether it be business leaders or whatever, I'm just trying to make an impact one way or another.
I love that. Man after my own heart, which is why you're on the show, right? Leadership with Heart is the name of the podcast.
That's right,
And I
exactly.
like to highlight people who are focusing on the right things and those like you who are, chairs of board and things like that, because when I think about my limited interaction with boards, either being on nonprofits or working like through an organization on their corporate board, um, they have so much say as it relates to governance and even how the leaders are kind of okay to show up, what kind of resources are put behind that, what kind of accountability and enforceability is put behind that. And so I love the fact that someone like you is on some boards out in the world. I think some minds are changing and some practices are shifting. So that's good stuff.
Well, I like to think that's the case.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, I'm curious. What do you think? So, what would people who reported to you in the past, or right now, like being on a board and having kind of that kind of leadership going on? What would people say about your leadership style, anyway?
You know what? That's a very interesting question. I don't know if people would say this about my leadership style, but I can tell you what I try to aspire to be, and this is sort of the heart of the book that I wrote, Transfluence. People used to ask me all the time, what do you look for in a leader, or what do you look for when you're hiring people? And when I've got it, I'm sure we'll probably get into my story at Prologis at some point in time, but I took over the company in a very, very difficult period of time when the company was on the verge of bankruptcy. And I had a great conversation with another leader whose name was John Mack. He was a CEO of Morgan Stanley at the time, and this was in 2008 when the whole world was falling apart. And I asked him, I said, John, what do you look for when you hire people, and how are you dealing with this? And he said to me, Walt, I deal with this on the basis of the 3 H's. And I said, okay, what is that? Now he's got me really intrigued. And he said, I think the best leaders, Walt, are humble, they're honest, and in this day and age, a banker needs to have a sense of humor. And I thought about those 3 words, and I mulled them over for months, because it really began to define how I wanted to lead other people. And the word humor, I didn't really always view myself as the most humorous person, but I think that word sort of falls under a broader word, and that is humanness, if you will, leading people with a heart. And I don't know if I have done a good job or not of emulating that in my life. I think I've done a reasonably good job, but I talk all the time about, I think some of the best leaders are people who are humble. And when I talk about humility, I don't, when you look it up in Webster's dictionary, you find words like weak and unassertive and submissive. And I think those words completely miss the mark when it comes to humility. That's not the way I define it. I think it takes real character, and courage and confidence to be a humble leader. And I don't think it's about being weak. I think it's about admitting that you have weaknesses. And humble leaders, I think really appeal to me, and I think appeal. And then if you want to build trust in an organization, you do it through humility, and then that word honesty. I mean, there's so many leaders that will say that they're really honest people, but I think when the rubber meets the road, and few leaders are comfortable with bad news, and I've seen leaders twist truth. I've seen leaders, not communicate when the news is bad, and I've seen leaders that can't deal with the elephant in the room, and that's, to me, great leadership is about brutal honesty. And then the third thing, humanness. I mean, I think leaders that empower, leaders that listen, leaders that encourage, leaders that give credit. Those are leaders that act in a human way. They humanize the experience with their employees. And so over the years, I've tried to be humble. I've tried to be honest, brutally honest, and I've tried to be human in everything that I do. Whether or not somebody would say that I was, I don't know, but that's what I've tried to and and hopefully, have succeeded 75% of the time.
Exactly. That's really all we can hope for. On this show, I
Right.
talk a lot about how this is a journey and it's not a journey to perfection. Perception is the reality in many cases. And I also talk about how that this is not it's not a journey to perfection. It's a journey to continuous improvement. We want to make sure that we're getting better every day, and not saying, well, and the end goal is that we're going to reach this, like, I don't know, leadership, like end of the course, and we have no other improvement to get done. And that would just never happen, right? It'll never happen.
It will never happen. None of us will be perfect, and we all make mistakes in life. That's for sure. But I do think that over the years, and I'm not just going to say myself, but our management team, we built trust in the organization, and I think I say to people all the time, trust, in my view, is the currency of business. If you can build trust, not just with your customers, and you've talked about a lot about that. But also with your people. If you can build trust, you can accomplish a tremendous amount. It's just a question of how you build trust. And I think and part of that is, just putting your pride aside, and focusing on other people around you. And as I said, being humble, being honest, and being human in the way that you interact with people. I say all the time that I think humility is a little bit of the way that you see yourself. Humanness is the way you see others, and honesty is the transaction that connects the two.
Very interesting. Very
Yeah.
interesting thought. I am curious to know, on this journey that we call leadership, and the places that you've been, fortunate enough to be, as far as, most people will never reach the level you were at and have the access you had in your life as it relates to the decision-making table, is what I mean by that. Is there ever a time when you feel like maybe the 3 H's you just talked about, maybe you fell short on one area, or maybe the human side, the heart-based side of leadership? Can you think of a specific story of maybe where you're like, I don't really feel like I was as representative as I wanted to be in my leadership? And now, how did you come out of that to become more of an enlightened leader? What was that journey? What did it look like?
So I'll tell you a story that I actually do think I ended up sort of handling it the right way, but I was really, really nervous about it. And and well, let me just tell you the story. I had just taken over the company, and this was in November of 2008. And we were on the verge of bankruptcy. And Wall Street Journal had just done a big front page article about how we were next in line in 2008. We'd been getting calls from everybody about whether or not we were going to make it. It was really, really a very harrowing time. And so we had a finance meeting one evening. It was after midnight. I was there with about, I don't know, 10 or 11 of our closest finance brethren. And one person said to me, "Well, I got some bad news for you." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "We're going to blow our bond covenants likely in the month of January." And we had somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 billion in bonds outstanding. And so when you blow a covenant, that means that basically the bondholders can essentially put you into bankruptcy. I was nervous about this, needless to say. And I had been with the company for 15 years. I left, I came back, I was asked to come back. And I just got white as a ghost. And I didn't know how to handle it. And I felt guilty because I was brought back to the company. And again, I haven't told that story yet, but I was brought back to the company to save the company. And I didn't have any answers. I just didn't know what to say. And I got, like I said, I felt like I was going to faint. I got white as a ghost. And I looked at everybody in the room and I said, do you all mind if I just take a quick break? And they said, no, Walt, go ahead. So I walked down the hallway and I ended up fainting. And when I fainted, um, I hit my head on a desk on the way down, and I split my head open. And I was laying what turned out to be, I was laying on the carpet for about 10 minutes. And it was, pitch black. And I got up and finally, when I got up, I was like, whoa, where am I? And I'm looking around, and then all of a sudden it dawns on me that there's 10 or 11 people still in the room waiting for me. So I went to the bathroom. I saw the cut in my head and tried to suture that up as quickly as I could, just with water, and it did stop bleeding. And then I walked in the room and I said, well, okay, let's talk about this bankruptcy thing. And I think it was my CFO. If not, it was one of the top people in the finance department looks at me and they said, well, no, Walt, let's talk about that god awful, ugly thing on your head right now. And you know what? I was totally busted. I didn't know what to say. And I look around the room, and this is where humility did kick in. And finally, I just said, you know what? I have absolutely no answers for bankruptcy. Like, I don't know what to say to any of you. And I said, I think you guys are the ones with all the answers. And I said, I'm embarrassed because I was hired to come here with the answers. But I realized that day, leadership is not about the answers that you have as a leader. It's about how you marshal people together and point them in the right direction and let them come up with all the answers. And that night, I was on display, and I said, guys, I fainted. I hit my head. I cut it. I have no idea what the answers are, and I'm nervous as hell. And I know that's not the right thing to say as a leader, but that's where I am. But you know what? The group came up with the answer. It took a month, but they came up with an answer that worked, not me. And you know what? At the end of the day, what hit me was that the power of vulnerability, that vulnerability can be a really, really powerful tool if used correctly. Mm-hmm. And in my case, I think what it really did was it opened up the possibility that people had that, hey, this guy doesn't have the answers. We do. They began to feel better about themselves. They felt like they were in a safe place to say the things. I mean, in some respects, to see the CEO say that and put himself in a position of vulnerability, allowed everybody else to put themselves in that safer place. And if you want to create real communication in an organization, that's the way to do it. And I was like, I don't think that it's something I would do over and over and over, because I think at some point in time, your board, your management team says, well, this guy is really a weak leader. Okay.
Yeah.
But at the right time and at the right place, I think that vulnerability is, the best showing of honesty, the most brutal showing of honesty that one can ever go through is when they put themselves in a position of vulnerability. And I did that day. Would I treat every situation that way? No. But in retrospect, it was one of those things where I was real embarrassed on one hand, and then the next day I realized, I think this is actually going to be a positive thing. It's good.
Yeah.
I'm going to get results here. And we did. And we never did declare bankruptcy. And we ended up working our way through it in the first and second quarters of the following year.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that story. Gosh, I cannot imagine what you were going through right in that moment. And I can think of nothing nearly as drastic and the stakes weren't as high as what you described. But I can kind of think in my mind, and I bet you those who are listening too can think of times when we didn't want to show that weakness or show a side of ourselves or show the fear. And if we were kind of in a position where we had no choice to do it, that the outcome was better. And it was because what I loved about it is that what you're talking about is that you kind of bring all heads together for the problem. You give them the permission to come up with a solution. and to take some of the weight off your shoulders,
Right.
and involving them in that process, you're right, really does uplift them. You were talking about uplifting earlier, right? It uplifts them because it makes them go deep and find their strengths and show and highlight those strengths. And yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful example. It really is a beautiful example, Walt. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
You
I have a
bet.
question for you as it relates to that story, though. How do you think someone right now that's listening could decide? Is there like a couple like triggers in your mind that could help them decide when that vulnerability could be a thing to lean into? Like, was there something in your example that if you had to go back, and I'm sure you did go back in hindsight, that you said, okay, what would be a trigger to know it's time to really open up, be humble, be vulnerable in the moment? What would help someone else in that, like in the future, if they had to kind of go and be in a similar example or whatever? What would be a thing that could help them, you think, in that case?
I think, in my case, and trying to relate it to that question, I would say, don't make up things that you don't know. When you're leading people, people can tell when you're fabricating things, or when frankly you don't know. And there are going to be times when you do know, because the likelihood is that you wouldn't be in that leadership position if you didn't. And there are going to be times when you have really good intuition. And then there's going to be times where you feel lost. And I think it's okay to tell people that you feel lost if that really is what's going through your mind. Now, don't get me wrong, you can't do that all the time, but there's times and places for it. And you just have to let your heart guide you,
Mm.
and I did. And I did, and it was absolutely the right thing to do. And don't get me wrong, I realized that in my position, I had to make the final decision in all cases. I just did. That was part of my job. And I don't fear making decisions. And I don't fear making tough decisions. I could never have been in the role that I was in if I feared it. And I think generally my people knew that. And so maybe that's what gave me comfort. I wasn't new in the organization. People knew who I was,
Mm-hmm.
and they had interacted with me over several years. So in some respects, it would be harder for a new leader to do that. But on the other hand, it's liberating when a new leader does do it. So I don't know that I can articulate the exact time, except I would just say, be honest and don't make things up that you don't know.
One of the things I was thinking about, Walt, is I'm just remembering the little details of your story is, you know, the signs of when we are either literally or figuratively hitting the wall. So like we're at a place where we're already up to here, and maybe like the anxiety is peaked, and we could be feeling a little out of control, which is where that kind of lightheadedness, kind of that stuff might have come. And it's like when you get there, what you were smart about is of you doing the thing you did, which is taking that time to uh, ask for the permission to walk out. Because when you ask for that permission to walk out, um, obviously they could see something wasn't right, and they were giving you that time, right? They were giving that time to do that. But you were smart enough in the moment to ask for it. Of course, you end up hurting yourself in that process. And so maybe it's like asking for the time, but maybe even like if you would have known, if you were feeling that way, I did this before. Let me give you an example of this. I'm thinking about what's happening with you. And again, the stakes weren't as high, but I'm thinking about it. I'm at an organization, and I I had like some issues with a boss I was working with, an issue with a customer, an issue with my husband. There was all these things that were kind of coming to a head. And I start to feel like my eyes get numb and my cheeks get numb and my shoulder gets numb and my arm gets numb. And I'm thinking, I am about to have a stroke. And I'm trying to like keep it all in myself, and I'm dealing with it. Finally, I can't, because I'm like, this is a stroke. So I go to my team members. This is a direct report. And I go to the next office and I go, I think you need to take me to the ER. I think I'm having a stroke.
Oh my goodness.
And I'm like 30 something. I'm like, I don't know what's happening here. And
Yeah.
so she gets me immediately, takes me to the hospital. We go in, they do all these tests, and it comes to find out I'm having a panic attack. But I had all the signs of like I was having a stroke. Never had it before. So that's why it was like so foreign. And I'm like, what the heck's happening here? And, but I let it get to that point.
Yeah.
Like there were signs, if I were to back it up and go before, right, there were signs before I'd already reached kind of a level of what's that? It's almost like a point of no return where it's like, I needed to already stop,
Yeah.
do that time where you say, can I have permission to exit the room? It's like, we need to witness the signs of our, of what's about to happen with us,
Yeah.
that we're at that place, there's no place of no return sooner, so that we can involve people sooner, so that we don't hit our heads, that we don't go through this point where we think we're having a stroke, right? I mean, think about it. But
Yeah.
because we are so protective of our images and our level and and like you were saying, like there's this confidence that's created with the board and the team because you're always seeming so confident and so strong, right? And same thing with me. And it's like, but when is the point where we don't go to the ER, we don't fall on our head, like all those things? And it's a turning point. And so what I want to say here is that for those who are listening, be thinking about, for yourself, like, are you already at this point, so that you don't have to do the points that Walt and I were talking about, more extreme things that are happening. How can you figure out what the triggers are for yourself that kind of can stop you from just going way off the rails on things, and involve people sooner in the
Yeah.
process of the problems to be solved, instead
Yeah.
of us, feeling like we have to do it by ourselves.
Yeah, and you know what? I think everybody's different. And for me, my faith actually plays a big role in the way that I handle myself. And when I start getting off the rails, I sit down and I just meditate, and I begin to pray, and honestly, it really helps me. But I'm not saying that that's the solution
Yep.
for everybody. But for me, I just need one-on-one time with my creator. That's the bottom line. And it does kind of bring me back. So anyway, but that's something that's worked for me over the years.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think, for everybody, you're right. What works for one works for others and doesn't work. The idea is to say, what is that trigger? Some people love gardening, from like this idea of
Yeah.
like, how do I feel myself? How do I center myself? How do I calm myself? To even have like the clearness of mind to say, oh, I need to like go ask my closest confidant like pretty quickly on something, right? I need to do this. Like, so it's that recognition point and awareness, and then saying, what is the thing that centers me in the moment before
Yeah.
I make a decision that's rash, that hurts more people, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
Because I can think of, even after that, I didn't want her, and I didn't say anything to everybody else in the organization about, and I never disclosed it even to like my boss later. Like, they kind of like hinted at it or whatever, but I never ever told them. I don't know. Did you ever tell anybody that actually, I mean, besides maybe your spouse or whatever, did you end up telling anybody in that meeting, here's what happened, my head got this, I fell? Did you even say
Oh yeah.
anything after that? You did?
I told everybody that night. I told everybody what had happened. I told them I was ready to faint, and I left, and I had fallen, and they could see the blood on the carpet in the room of the person that his office. And no, it was they all knew about it. It became folklore in the company. It was really kind of interesting. And I didn't care. I mean, from my perspective, I think it was a good message for people.
Oh, yes.
About how we're all in it together. Even the CEO faints.
Absolutely. No, I think it's an amazing message.
Oh, I think it's a really good message. Yeah, absolutely.
But right before you had the need to do it, and that person said, nope, we're not going on, I need to recognize something's not right here. That person right there having the courage to say, no, Walt, we're not going forward, was already another thing. Like, just thinking about that. And the good thing about it is there's obviously a level of safety you created already in that group for that person to say, nope, we're not moving on. Let's address what's happening with you. Because I mean, plenty of people could just completely ignore it,
No
right?
question.
Because they're too afraid. But you didn't create that environment.
Well, I don't think I did. Everybody was a little stunned that night, I'll be honest, but
I'm sure.
They all came up with the right answer over time, and they felt empowered to. When I talk about giving credit and empowering other people, that's one way of doing it. It really is. And I think they felt empowered to come up with the right solution, and they did.
Powerful. So many ways to peel that back.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so now we've reached that point of the podcast where you get to ask me any question you want. You know a nice amount about me. What question would you have for me? I know you've already been the podcast host once, but now you're on my show. You get to ask me a question. What is that?
You know what? I want to ask you something about, because I know your focus on culture and people and all that stuff. But there's something that's kind of been bugging me recently. And I'm kind of curious your opinion on it. And that is this whole notion of mental health. Okay. Um, when I was the CEO, to be candid with you, it didn't seem like it was much of a problem. But boy, just being on the boards of companies today, I feel like it is. I don't know if it's social media. I don't know, increased social media. I don't know if it's because of the increased um, how fast our lives are moving today. And I also don't know if it was there 20 years ago and people just didn't talk about it, if they brushed it underneath of the rug. But increasingly, I'm hearing more and more and more about the mental health issues that people have in the workplace, the difficulties they're having with their jobs, maybe perhaps the difficulties they're having connecting with their supervisors. But I just feel like there's this unrest in the workplace today that I'm not sure was there 10 and 20 years ago. And I know you can't, I'm not asking you to speak to 10 or 20 years ago, but do you see this as a trend? And I know it's a broad question as to how you deal with it, but do you see it as a trend? And do you see more and more companies dealing with it today?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Yeah, it is actually. I do think that it actually is a trending that we're seeing, and I think it actually is a byproduct of the pandemic and the racial unrest that really kind of boiled up all through this time,
Right.
and the almost like the permission to have discussions around this. I actually think it was present. I think it's just something we weren't comfortable talking about before. Now it's almost commonplace to have these discussions because of like it impacted so many people at your level in organizations, on boards, or at the CEO level, who even like that isolation where they couldn't see people, people from all the way around the organization. So while it was like the pandemic had so many bad outcomes, it also had good outcomes. And so the one good outcome is that we talk about it more. So it looks like there's more of it. I think there probably is more of it because of the social isolation and the different things that were happening there. But at the same time, I think it's more about it's elevated because now we have a level of comfort talking about it because it became commonplace about how we felt working from home, not being able to be with our, our families, our coworkers, and all those things. That blocked offness that we had made it okay to talk about. Same thing around race relations and how people in marginalized groups feel that they didn't really feel comfortable, but became kind of top of the heap conversations.
Yeah.
Some of those have calmed down, but they still, the conversations are still there. But some of that hype, has calmed down around the race relations side. And what do I see as far as the change in that? One of the things, interestingly enough, I just got some of the initial results from a study we just finished at Employee Fanatics, and I wanted to take a look at the impact at work when it comes to active listening as it relates to, and the impact against belonging, hybrid, of course, and then loneliness. I wanted to see kind of a cross section of all of it. And interestingly enough, very, very high level, I think I was a little surprised to see how much more happy and balanced people who work in hybrid world are in the study that we had. And so we're working on putting together some webinars and some stuff on that just to kind of inform more kind of C-suites about what they need to be looking at on the hybrid context and what they can do in the workplace. And I do think mental health plays a huge role in that. I mean, if you think about it, there's a freedom now that allows us to even like go see our therapist smack dab in the middle of the day for working hybrid or remote. Where before there was always like this weird thing, like you couldn't really talk about not doing that, or you couldn't talk about anxiety you felt around this or that. And now it's just kind of commonplace. I think that's what you're sensing, Walt.
Yeah, I really am sensing it, and I know it's a problem, and I know there's a number of CEOs that are having difficulties getting their arms around it and figuring out how to deal with it. And I see it, I sense it, and I don't know. I was just kind of curious as to what you're
Mhm.
saying out there. Do you think
Yeah.
companies are management teams spending more time thinking about how they deal with it? You see that?
I think, you know what, the one I'm hearing most of is just the kind of the hybrid thing. I think but I don't know on I would need to, I have another friend of mine who does, her main focus is mental health, where mine is overarching workplace culture, and kind of employee listening, right? She has more of a just mental health is her main thing. And so I might chat with her some more about what she's seeing, in that regard. As far at the board level, at the C-suite level, not just at the employee level. I'm curious to know about like how they're grappling. When I looked at the loneliness, the Surgeon General came out with a report on loneliness and social isolation at work, and just kind of what workplaces can do to, and that's going to obviously play up again. That's going to go right up against the mental health issue too.
Of course.
Then I decided to incorporate that in this study because I was curious to see, and it was interesting to see. Well, number one, that people in the hybrid place are are less lonely, and also looking at like still the percentage of people thinking about hurting themselves at work on a daily basis
Mm.
in all areas or facets, like no matter where they work, but less, more of those in the workplace and those that are fully remote than hybrid. It's an interesting thing. There's a lot of work to be done. I'm excited to dig into this and really be able to share it with more people because I think we need to go deeper on this. We really do.
On my podcast, the last couple we had Susan Packard on, who was the chief operating officer at HGTV, and she has a book out on sobriety right now, and she spoke to that in great detail. And then we also had Dr. Neil Epperson on, who is the head of psychiatry at CU, Anschutz Medical Center, and she came on, and she was talking about it as
That's
well.
how I know her.
I'm trying to raise awareness as much as I can about it, but I'm also trying to learn as much about it myself.
Yes,
I
that's
think it's
good
a real
though.
issue, and it's definitely feels like a growing issue in the workplace.
Yeah, I think it is, and I want to go a little deeper. I think, and like I said, I'm trying to look at all the different aspects. There's only so many things you focus on at one time. But as I continue to do kind of more listening sessions, and uh, particularly around those in marginalized groups, those who have anxiety, those who have the unseen disabilities out in the world,
Yeah.
um, I'd like to dig deeper and deeper into those topics, kind of a sociology perspective of things.
Yep. Yep. Well,
So for those,
go
I
ahead.
was just going to say for those leaders right now who could be at a crossroads, they could be at that tough time, kind of like you faced way back when in 2008, um, and or they could just be like searching for some gleaning some hope, looking at some direction. What might be a couple pearls of wisdom you'd leave them with today as you think about the leadership of the heart concept and how they can lean more into that as well?
Yeah. You know, my book is really about taking the focus off of yourself. And I really believe that too often when we're down and out about the things in our lives, we're so focused on ourselves. We're so focused on the things going on in our lives. And I've got a couple pearls of wisdom. I think number one, I think take the focus a little bit off of yourself and be gracious and thankful for the things that you've got in your life and what you've been given, and also find out what you can do for other people. And I'm speaking specifically about leaders, people that lead other people. Just a couple pearls of wisdom. I try to get up every morning, and before emails and before phone calls and all those things get going, I try to think of three things. And I'm not always perfect at this, but most days I do. First of all, I think it's helpful to get up and think about somebody that you owe a bit of gratitude to. Somebody that has done something for you that you can express gratitude to. Do it. And the second thing is think of somebody who you can give a word of encouragement to. Not necessarily the same thing. Could be a completely different person. My daughter gave me something that I put up in my office that I look at every day. It says, "Be kind, because everybody you meet is fighting a battle that you don't know." And it's so true. We all think about our own battles, but there's a lot of other people that are around us that are fighting much bigger battles than the ones that we have. And so, get up every day and give somebody a word of encouragement. And the last thing I would say is be positive. Um, there's a lot of negativity in the world, a lot. And unfortunately, we glean too much on the negative because we watch a lot of news, and that's all the news, that's all the news shows. But be positive. Nobody that's ever been negative has ever influenced anybody in the world. But you want to be an influence to people, and you want to, you want to be a great leader. You got to be thinking outside of the box, thinking about the things that affect everybody else, and just be positive about everything that you can in the world. And so I think being gracious, expressing gratitude, I think expressing words of encouragement, and I think being positive kind of gets you a little bit out of your own element of the things that you're struggling with, and takes the focus off of you and puts it on other people. And I actually think that's good, really good, especially for leaders in this world.
Such goodness here. I'm so glad that I asked you on here. I knew it right when I met you. I'm like, I'm getting you on here. So I'm glad we actually, made this happen. And I really want to thank you, Walt, for being just the open and honest leader that you are, the change maker in the world, and just bringing your unique voice to the show.
Thanks, Heather. It's my pleasure. It's great being on with you. I love being on with thought leaders like yourself.
Well, thank you. Well, thanks everybody too for listening to the Leadership with Heart podcast. Be well.